Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Avi, and I help run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Najwa Zebian's newest book, Welcome Home, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Searching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and authors, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we're thrilled to have with us Najwa Zebian for the launch of her newest book, Welcome Home, A Guide to Building a Home for Your Soul. Najwa Zebian is a Lebanese-Canadian activist, author, speaker, and educator. Her search for a home was central to her early years as she struggled to find her place in the world. She became a teacher and a doctoral candidate in educational leadership. As Najwa began to write in an effort to connect with and heal her first students, a group of young refugees, she found that she was also writing to heal herself. The author of 3 collections of poetry, she delivered the TEDx talk, Finding Home Through Poetry, and recently launched a digital school, Soul Academy, and a podcast, Stories of the Soul. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Glamour, Elle Canada, HuffPost, and more. Joining Najwa in conversation tonight is Danica Patrick. Danica is the proprietor of Somnian and Danica Rosé Wine Companies. A public speaker, she hosts a weekly personal growth podcast called Pretty Intense. So without further ado, please welcome Najwa Zebian and Danica Patrick to the stage.
Hello, how are you today?
Hello, I'm so good. How are you?
Good. So excited for this conversation because last time we had a conversation, it was incredible.
It was. It was a long time ago. And it's funny how we just got on here and you're like, it's been a long time since we had a good conversation. I said, we seem to save most of them for on camera.
Yes, we do. We are that way.
We're open, I think that's
Yes.
it's a result of being really open with your feelings, open with your experiences, and have, I think we both share this sort of wanting to help people heal too. And so it's only through showing your own vulnerability that you give permission to everyone else to do the same.
Absolutely. It's like leading through action, not just
Yeah.
through preaching. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where shall we start?
Huh.
Where do we begin?
Well, I mean, I think it's always so good for people to get a snapshot of what you're doing right now and kind of where you've been and what you've been dealing with.
Yes.
I think that's always just a good update. It gets people informed of, just where we're at today.
Yes.
There's just like been such a year, right?
It's been quite the journey since I came to the realization that I had to start building a home within myself, and to the point where, I started actually seriously thinking about what that looks like practically, because the idea of building a home within yourself is like, it's very inspirational, it's very poetic. But how do you actually go about building a home within yourself so that you can become that person that you come home to at the end of the day, as opposed to going to other people for shelter? So I came to this realization about 5 years ago when I was giving a TEDx in London, UK. And the reason I say that is I'm from London, Canada. And it was on stage, and it just came to me that, what I've been doing, what I had been doing in my life up to that point was building homes in other people, like just begging people for love, begging people for just seeing my worth. And so, the last time you and I had a conversation, it was around the time that I was thinking of, writing my next book. And I was sitting with my new agents at the time, and the original idea was to write a book about letting go. It was a self-development book, but about letting go. And we were sitting in a coffee shop, and it was the first time we met. And I said to them, I have all these ideas for the book, but the title is not coming to me. And I was like, one time I was thinking of writing a book about building a home within yourself, and the title immediately came to me. It was Welcome Home. I could see it in front of me. And they both looked at each other and they were like, that's the book that you need to write. So over this last year, I've been, sitting down every single day and writing, what does that home within actually look like? And it began with a journey of brainstorming, like, what are the elements of a home? What really makes a home feel like a home within? And so I started reflecting on all the knowledge that I had known up to that point in my life about self-love and forgiveness and feeling your emotions and having compassion for yourself and for the world around you, and making sure that people who enter your life enter with compassion, and that you know how to build boundaries and all that stuff. And I was like, I've known this for so long. Why do I not apply it? And so in the context of building a home within, it was like, what brings all of those elements together? And so I started thinking, like, when you build a house, you can't just say, I have all these rooms. You start with a very strong foundation. So I was like, you start with a strong foundation for yourself. And that foundation is self-acceptance and self-awareness, understanding what brought you to where you are right now in your life, and accepting that where you are right now in your life is actually where you are supposed to be. So, being in that state of radical acceptance, as opposed to constantly trying to change the narrative of who you are. That shouldn't have happened to me, or if this didn't happen, blah, blah, blah. Come from a place of, I am here because the journey that led me to this place was the journey that led me to this place. I accept that I am who I am as a result of that, or despite that, or whatever it is. So,
but I'm totally getting your flow, like,
yes,
building the
good
foundation, feeling it, knowing where it's coming from, and
starting
you there
really well.
Yeah.
So
Keep
for
going.
example,
Beautiful.
you're so sweet. For example, when we talk about self-love, for example, say I only have that element, but it's not sitting on a very strong foundation, then I could put that element or that room inside of someone else so that they could define for me what that love for myself looks like, because I don't have it on that strong foundation. I have it on, it's more on a logical level. It's more on a theoretical, inspirational level. I don't really know what self-love looks like for me. So I allow someone else to define that for me. So that process of brainstorming what a home actually practically looks like within came from, just brainstorming and saying, does this make sense? And why, if this is the case, why have I not done that in my life? So I reflected on everything. I reflected on, what is it that made me believe my whole life that I needed someone to love me for me to feel loved? Why is it that my whole life I was searching for, not just for someone to love me, but also for someone to tell me, this accomplishment is so great, like, you're a great person. Why did I constantly seek external validation for feeling okay and feeling enough? Like, why was I never, ever, ever able to say, I deserve love? I didn't even know what kind of love I deserved, or I deserve to get that job, or it was more like, well, if I get it, that means I deserve it because someone else decided that for me. So Welcome Home was a result of that, logical thinking plus like constant deep reflection, like really digging deep into my life and into everything that I've come to know to this point in my life. And now it's here, it's alive. It's
Well, what did you figure out? Like, why was there a pattern of trying to find, building a home in other people and looking for external validation? Like, what were the layers that peeled back for you to get to something where there was true raw emotion, and I'm going to guess usually some level of an inner child there, some sort of very, 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 very tenderness that feels like you've never even touched it before almost.
Yes. So the story begins with me, and this was actually the chapter that was part of my proposal that sold the book. And I remember, like, I myself felt like just writing that brought me so much healing, because I was able to finally put something that I was so vulnerable and personal to me, I was able to give it a voice by putting it on paper. So it begins with, an almost relationship that never really evolved into anything. And I felt like I had such an overblown reaction over this, maybe or almost not really happening. And I was like, why am I feeling like someone who I'd been with for like 50 years left me when there was never really anything? Like the pain was not parallel in any way to the actual tiny, tiny, tiny event that was really nothing. So I was talking to a new therapist that I'd been speaking to, and she works with energies, and she's a great friend now. And she told me the first time she heard me speak on the phone, she said, something tells me that you experienced something around the age of 8 or 9 that shaped your belief that you don't deserve to be held onto. And as soon as she said that, I started bawling my eyes out because the story came right away. And the story was, long story short, I was born and raised in Lebanon, but I was the sixth in my family. All of my siblings, who are older than me by many years, were born and raised in Canada. And my parents moved to Lebanon. I was born there. So I grew up constantly being surrounded by adults. And because my parents would constantly travel between Lebanon and Canada, or if I was staying with my dad, he would think it's better for me to be at my aunt's or my uncle's or whatever, where, there's a cooked meal, there's somebody who could really offer me that feeling of family and be there, on time. So I spent, the years from such a young age living with several relatives. So I never really had that feeling of home. So there's one memory in particular where it was the night before Eid, which is a major Muslim celebration. It's like Christmas, and you get gifts, you wake up really early, and you're really happy. And so I was at my aunt's house, and me and her kids were playing in the playroom, and then she came to the room and said, let's go downstairs, it's family time. And that excluded me. Like, it was very clear that I had to stay. And I remember exactly what I looked like then. I was wearing a green turtleneck, and my hair was like half up, half down. I was really young. And I remember just staring at the metal fireplace and listening to them laugh and say, look what I got. And I didn't get any of that. And all I could ask in that moment was, why can't I have that? Like, as such a youngster, I had no way of putting that into a word. And that wasn't the gifts, and it wasn't the gifts. It was the love. It was feeling like I was part of something. It was feeling like someone went out of their way to say, you belong here. And so when I went back to that story, it literally felt, and this is not an exaggeration, it felt like something within me opened, and there was like gushing poison all over my body. And it felt like a wound that just all of a sudden was given permission to be felt.
Sorry to interrupt you. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I think it would be better if we do try to move the conversation to Zoom, just so that we have less interference, okay? So to our audience members, just stay put. I will be putting the link on the chat, and we will continue the conversation shortly, okay? In the meantime, if we still don't have any issues, keep going the conversation. I will let you know when the Zoom webinar is ready, okay?
Perfect. Okay, so as I was saying, when I remembered that, when that memory came to me, it honestly felt like there was like a little box inside of me that was locked for so long, and now that it was open, it was like it was going all over my body. I was feeling like there's something strong being like pumped into my veins. That's how it felt. And I cried for several days because it hit me that every single ending in my life, I had taken it back to that same conclusion. Why don't I have that? Why don't I have that? I don't deserve that. And so that's what began the journey to me understanding why little moments of people walking away or me not getting certain things that I aimed for, instead of saying, well, that happens, it doesn't mean anything about me, I would immediately take it back to that same conclusion that that is not
Wow.
something that I am worthy of. So
Wow.
one of the strategies that I ask people to reflect on and welcome home is, what is your why can't I have that story? What's that story for you? So yeah.
I had an Akashic reading back a few months ago, and she used the expression that when something comes up, she goes, I try and always go, I know I need to remember the first and worst. What was the first and worst time I felt like this? And so that's like another way for a trigger for people. Like,
Yeah.
what was the first and worst time? And that to me
Mhm.
was your first and worst. But what I'm hearing, because like I've been on this journey and we both have, shared so much about this, but on the journey of figuring out what creates my patterns, what holds me back. And
Yes.
there was just recently a podcast that came out that I did with a guy named Peter Crone. It was just last week, and it really went into it. And so I was kind of thought my dad was a really big source of my problems, and then it was only recently that I figured out like the mom element to it.
Mhm.
And when I say all this, we all get traumas from our parents. We all get some sort of
Yes.
patterning from our parents. And the thing is that it's actually not even our parents. It's our parents' parents. And it's probably our parents' parents' parents.
Yeah.
It's like such an ancestral line. And so,
Yeah.
so the pattern that I figured out was that, and I'm kind of hearing the parallel in your story, but my pattern was that my mom kind of emotionally abandoned me, not on purpose. It's just she didn't know how to
Yes.
access that aspect of her feelings and her emotions and her being. And so it wasn't able to be shown to me and given to me. And so I would then fast forward into my adult life, I would abandon myself emotionally, which is the same thing that I was getting from
Yeah.
her. I was abandoning myself emotionally and building homes in other people
Yeah.
and looking for validation and erring on that much more codependent side of things. And so it was such a big realization. And for people that haven't gone through like a really big trauma, a childhood sort of processing trauma, uh, it's a big release. Like you talked
Yes.
about crying for days. I was bawling my eyes out. Like it's one of these like it's like convulsions. It's like
Yes.
it's like you get hot. It's like you can't stop.
Yeah.
You almost don't even
You're
know
like, where
where
is
it's
this
coming
coming
from.
from?
Right.
Yeah.
It's just deep inside, and there's so much, and it's never been looked at before to process. And so for those of you who, are on this journey and have come here because, you're looking for answers too, and there's things in your life that are difficult, the only way to the other side is through. And the
Mhm.
through is you have to, it's really like you have to go into the fire. You have to burn it away. And I know you've
Yes.
wrote poems about this, you've wrote so much
Yes.
about this, but you have to like walk through that fire. You have to go through the emotions, and you have to then what it would be was you have to alchemize that event into something else. It's just alchemy is just taking one thing and making it another. You take
Yes.
that pain and you turn it into something else. And the good thing is that just knowing what the hardest part is figuring out where it came from. But once you
Yes.
see it, even just seeing it heals so much of it. There's still some cleanup
Absolutely.
to do after, but just being
Mhm.
able to identify it and look at it and just like hug the crap out of your inner child who
Oh,
didn't get what it needed. And we all have it though. This is nothing that's just you and me. This is not just two emotional people or two people on this healing spiritual path. Everybody has this.
yes, absolutely. And I talk about gold stitching in Welcome Home, where it's like after you go through some kind of traumatic event, or after you realize that you were broken in a certain way, the goal isn't to go back to who you were before that break happened. The goal is for you to say, that happened, accept that you can't go back and change it, and accept that the growth that you went through as a result of that, if you're asking for that event, say it's in your childhood, to go away, then you're asking for the growth that you went through to go away. You're asking to go back to being whoever you were
Yeah.
before that. And that's, you can create such a beautiful new masterpiece that you yourself have put back together, and that is painful. Like, the reason I used stitching is because stitching is painful. Like, imagine yourself genuinely looking at all the parts of who you are that now you've become aware of, and say, I love you, I love you, I love you, I accept you, and putting yourself back together. So beautiful, you know? So I just, anytime that I feel that I am trying to push the pain away or wish the pain away, whether it was a pain from my childhood or a recent one, I know that I am just trying to avoid getting through it. I'm trying to just put it, to the side until I'm ready. And that's why in Welcome Home, I have the surrender room where you actually surrender to your emotions. And I talk about it in a way that's like, if it's a negative emotion or something that you don't want to feel that's standing at your door, it knocks and knocks and knocks and knocks, and it gets really loud the more you don't open the door. But you think that the more you ignore it, that means that it doesn't exist anymore. But what's happening is you've gotten used to that knock being in the background, and you're adjusting your life accordingly. And so what happens is, with time, you learn to live with that pain standing at the door. And you think that, if I open the door for it, then there's so much that I have to deal with. But the thing is, and I wrote about this in Welcome Home, that door is not outside of you, it's within you. That ache that's standing at the door is inside of you. You just have to make that conscious decision to say, I'm going to let you in. I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to understand what it is that you're trying to tell me. I'm going to see you so that I can see myself. I'm going to hear you so that I could hear myself, by understanding why it is that I'm putting this resistance to seeing you and feeling you, because that resistance is only between me and myself. And once you do that, then you are the one who's in control of that ache and what you do with it, as opposed to it constantly being there and you having to adapt your life to its presence in the background. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's reminding me of this thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is that it's like like life is simple, actually, but the human experience is very complicated. And that's because we can't see ourselves. And so we need other people to show us us.
Yes.
And so through your relationships, you were able to see this aspect of you that was not building a home in you, but building a home in them. And it was able to show you the pain, the pattern through the pain, to go, okay, why do I keep repeating this? Looking at the dynamic, and then where is that coming from? Because if we didn't have anyone to bounce all these things off of, we don't learn them. So it's really complicated, because we need this experience, and we spend our whole life mostly in sort of like the ego, where we are trying to protect ourselves. And it's like it's a superhero trait. Like, the ego is a great thing in a way, but it's very short term. And so it's like the ego is impatient because it knows its time is limited, and the soul is patient because it knows it has forever. And so, I've been going around this idea that, everywhere I walk now, everything I do, anytime I'm triggered, anytime I'm projecting, anytime there's emotion that comes up, I go, what is this showing me about me? It's like, if someone walks down the street and, bumps into me, I'm like, buddy. And it's like, okay, wait, why did I react? Okay, what is this showing me about me? Oh yeah, I would never be rude, so I judge him for being rude because I would never run into someone like that. But then there's like layers to it, right? Because it's not only just you, but then it's people having a bad day. And so, but the good thing that I've learned is that once I start to sort of identify my role and my emotions and patterns within certain dynamics, then all of a sudden I get very compassionate and patient with other people. And all of a sudden I almost think to myself, like, oh, I have no idea what they're going through, because I've just identified I'm going through something. So I'm like, oh, I have no idea what they're going through.
Yes, I think the stories that we tell ourselves in a way reflect how we would treat people if we were in that situation, and what it would take for us to treat someone that way. And it's like we throw that projection back at ourselves and say, well, they must be thinking that of me for them to actually think that I deserve to be treated that way. And it's this whole story that you're telling yourself, when really it could be they're having a bad day, they're going through a bad moment. They didn't see me. They were so caught up in something that, you know, and it's interesting that you talk about seeing ourselves through other people's eyes, and you know, putting those labels on ourselves based on what others see about us. Because in the clarity room, I talk about that, and I say part of the reason that when we look at ourselves in the mirror, and this is not necessarily, you know, an actual mirror, but trying to figure out who we authentically are on the inside, the reason that we can't see that authentic self is that we've had years and years and years of defining ourselves by what others told us about ourselves, or by that image of who we think we need to be that was constructed for us by someone outside of us. So I describe it as a blur. And I say, if this mirror that you're trying to look into hasn't been cleaned in ages, there's going to be a blur standing in the way of you and your actual authentic self. So you need to remove that blur. You need to clean that mirror and ask yourself, you know, if I could write down what my life would look like now in terms of what identities I would choose to carry, as opposed to which ones am I actually carrying. If you were to ask yourself that question and give yourself the choice to construct that life, you know, on a blank canvas, the way that you would like it to be, the way that feels authentic to you, what would that life look like? And, you know, a big part of the reason why I wrote that is I had to do that when, you know, I had to look at my conditioning, my religious, my cultural, my environmental, every single conditioning that I had that showed me that unless I was X, Y, and Z, I'm not enough, or something's wrong with me, or I'm on the wrong path. I had to look at all of that conditioning that led me to a place in my life where I felt like so much of myself was not me. I would abandon, just like you said, I would abandon myself, not just emotionally. I would abandon myself in every way just so that someone else could welcome me, or someone else could say, oh, you know, that's so great that you're like that. Or I put that ahead of myself. And what happened as a result of that is I didn't really know who I was. Like, I didn't know who I was without others telling me who I was. And I think,
how did you find, like, go into maybe more examples of how you figured out who you were, because this is not as easy as it sounds. It's not like, oh yeah, this is me. It's like, we have family, jobs, some people have kids, we have partners, we have all kinds of things that just keep us stimulated. And I've gone through my own journey of that. But what did you do to figure out, like, who you were?
Yes. So I talk about inner silence and spending time with yourself, listening to the voices from within. And I say right away, probably the first voices that come to you are the ones at the surface. It's your ego speaking to you, that, you know, it's, and people ask, well, how do I differentiate between the voice that's my ego and the voice that's my authentic self? And I say, your ego is very reactive. It's not calm at all. It reacts to everything around you, and it wants you to believe something. It wants to keep you hooked onto a story or onto some kind of a, you know, see, I told you, like, don't try that, don't do this, don't. Your true self is more like, if you think of an ocean, at the surface there's tides and there's waves, but when you think like deep into the ocean, it's very calm, it's very peaceful. Your authentic self feels like more of a, you know, of an eternal, you know, way of how to be, and way of how to think. Like, if you were to take 24 hours before you responded to someone, then what does that voice within say? You know, give it time. Like, before you send that text, you really want to send it. Like, the first 5 minutes, it's like the worst. And then 10 minutes, and then an hour, and then 5 hours, and then a day. You're like, you know what? I really didn't want to send it, because now you're actually listening to your innermost self. And so I do have a strategy in there where I say, and it's in steps, I say, listen to that voice, and then, spend some time with it. And then now that you listen to it and you can validate what it's telling you, now you can start speaking back to it. And if it's a voice that you don't identify with, like it's something that you, again, your authentic self is like, that doesn't agree with who I am as a person. Now you can speak to it and say, like, I am not you, and my worthiness
Right.
is not dependent on you. So I have that strategy in the
Yeah.
clarity room, I believe. And I give an example of when I went through that in my life. So when I moved out of my parents' house, which was at the age of 27, which culturally speaking, it's frowned upon because you get married and you move out. And so that was the first time in my life that I was living in my own place, where silence was
So
a
normally,
real
hang on.
visitor.
So normally you weren't supposed to move out yet?
No.
You move out once you get married.
Yes.
Wow.
You live at home until you get
Okay.
married. But yeah, so part of my growth was saying, I need that for myself. I need to be
Yeah.
able to sit and reflect. I had been writing for, a couple years at that point, and I needed silence. I craved it so much. And then when I finally got it, I would sit there, and I didn't have a TV in my apartment until last year. But at the time I didn't have one, and that was a conscious choice. And I would just sit in silence for so long, and just, it was so uncomfortable for me to sit with myself, because I always had noises around me, and now all of a sudden I could hear the noises from within. And so one of the things that I was reflecting on was, when you try to think of your purpose and you try to keep motivated to move forward, I was like, in 100 years, if someone wrote a biography about me, what would it look like? And I imagined it, and I see a picture, and then I see Najwa Zebian changed the world by, and then immediately that picture caught my attention. And in the picture, I wasn't wearing the hijab, which at the time of having the reflection, I was wearing it. So I was like, I don't actually see myself the way that I project myself into the world. And for the longest time, I believed, right?
I mean, that was such a big deal.
Yeah. It hit me so hard, and I just knew I needed to make that transition, knowing what kind of an uproar it would cause, both in my personal life and in my public life. And I just had to do it. But see, that was part of what led me to my authentic self. It was spending that time to the point where now my inner voice was a lot more powerful than all the voices I would hear from outside. Like, this is how you should be. This is what you should look like. You should represent, our community in this way or in that way, or this is how you can be a good girl or a good woman or whatever it is. Now, all of a sudden, I'm listening to myself. I'm listening to myself in isolation of all these voices. And it was like, it was so clear to me. Like, the picture was so vivid. And immediately after that, I started thinking, like, how do I go about this? And the reason I'm talking about this in so much detail is I know how hard it is to change when the closest people to you are the ones that you're mostly afraid will, abandon you or not love you anymore or be disappointed. Like that is, especially for someone who is a people pleaser, it's not a thought that you want to entertain, that you could disappoint someone who you've been pleasing for so long. And it's so important that you tell yourself, I would rather be loved for who I actually authentically am than be loved for an image, a fabrication that doesn't even have the capacity to receive that love that's being given to me, because that's not actually me. Think about it this way. I would rather be loved for who I actually authentically am than be loved for a fabrication of someone who I'm actually not, and that someone doesn't, like, that someone exists at the, what's the word? The price of that fabricated image existing is my authenticity. So that means that someone loving that inauthentic self of mine means that I can't feel that love because that's not authentically me. I'm just saying they're loving an image that I've projected to them, but then who loves me? So that's why when we say, like, you could be in a room full of people, but you feel lonely, it's because they don't see you.
Yeah.
So make sure that you are not compromising, you're not paying the price of your authenticity to be loved.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to break some of the closest relationships to you,
Yeah.
not out of wanting to hurt them, but out of saying, if I can't be my true self around you, then I can't live my life in accordance to what you believe I need to be living my life.
Yeah. I mean, it takes such bravery and such a journey to get there. And I mean, I would venture to say that most people want to be loved for their authentic self. It's just, how do you get to the authentic self? But I think that it's such a good indicator what you just said about I can't feel that love because it's not me. That should be an indicator. Like, let's say you're someone who has insecurities, as we all do. You go about and you present yourself, and somebody's like, oh, oh, you're so sweet. Oh, you look beautiful. Oh, you're whatever. Like, whatever. If you're on some kind of facade to that person a certain way, feel not really you. Imagine you got ready and you wore this crazy outfit you think is so cool, but you think it looks ridiculous. And someone out on the street goes, you look awesome. And you're like, yeah, I do. Because like you were the one that was like, I'm not really sure, but I love it. And I know I'm using somewhat trivial examples, but this can be a sort of taken in all directions. But that's such a good clue that if you can't feel what someone is saying to you, it could be an indicator that you're not living your authentic self, for sure.
Yes.
And also it could, I think there's also some aspect of it too, that it could be a part of yourself that is part of that inner child. Like if someone, because people are, again, they're mirrors and they're giving you feedback. And if they keep repeating the same thing to you, you should probably take a moment and listen to it because there's information there. But being your authentic self, I mean, we're probably living in a day and age where it seems like more and more people are stepping into that. And, there's exuberance there. There's like peace there. There's like, it's like joyful. And there's freedom. And essentially at the core of it, it's a freedom. And that is hard to get to.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, sometimes when you start living authentically in a way that doesn't feel fake to you, you might experience some shame and you might experience some guilt because you've always been fed the narrative that to experience that kind of joy, that must mean that you're doing something wrong. And I talk about this in Welcome Home and I say, don't take that as an indication to revert back to your inauthentic self. Take that as, this is something I must get through because I know that there are going to be, and I talk about this process as unveiling layers and layers of what you've accumulated over the years of that image of who you think you need to be. And as you unveil, understand it's going to be uncomfortable. It's not like this magical thing where you're like, this is who I authentically am and I'm going to be living like this the whole time. You're going to experience so much shame and so much guilt. And you might experience it in stages where at first it's just with the people who are around you and then someone who you haven't seen in a year. And it's this continuous process of facing, of having that past image of yourself, face new people, and just telling yourself, I don't need to explain. I talk about this in Welcome Home this way. I say a butterfly doesn't explain its metamorphosis to people. You don't have to explain your transformation to people. You just be, and they take on that responsibility of radically accepting you as you are. Your job is to radically accept yourself as you are. They can deal with that part.
Oh yeah. And I'm just thinking, I'm like thinking of before a butterfly is a butterfly, it's a caterpillar, and a caterpillar climbs is just got legs and it's on a tree or it's on a branch, right? And then all of a sudden it can fly. And so the world of a caterpillar and the world of a butterfly are so much different. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about the saying that I've said to myself many times, which is my new life is going to cost me my old one. And that's, I mean, sometimes it comes in the form of, you know, broken relationships, through partnerships, through friendships, family, and, you know, jobs, where you live. There are so many things that can be, that might transition and shift. But choose you. Just keep choosing you. I guarantee all the roads, when you choose you with integrity and respect, meaning for yourself and others, then it will always lead to joy. It will always lead there.
Yes.
And but there's going to be that burning process. And, you know, I think we keep reiterating this, that there's going to be pain in this. It's not, it's like, it's energy. So you work with a therapist, it's about energy, right? So it's not free. You don't just get to all of a sudden get to being more joyful and happy and content and, you know, and more embodied in your true self all of a sudden. Like, that's not it's an energy shift. So the energy, like, there has to be an alchemization. There's got to be some pain for some joy. And, you know, one of the things that I've experienced in my own life is that, as I've also spectrum, usually more of a positive. So my scope of emotions just keeps.
We can actually start with, we have a few questions. So while we wait for Danica to reconnect, if you don't mind answering a few of the audience questions.
Absolutely.
Alrighty.
I'm ready.
Okay, so our first question comes from Maria, and she asks, as a daughter of Mexican immigrants, I've always felt a sense of not belonging. I'm mostly seen as not American enough and not Mexican enough. How do you reconcile with a constant changing identity while at the same time creating a home for yourself?
So I actually talked specifically about this in Welcome Home, and I brought the concept of a third space from my training and education into explaining this. So if you think of, you know, the first space as your first home, which is your, you know, your family, your heritage, where you come from, all the identities, the language that you speak, all of the identities that belong to that. Then you think of the second space of where you're currently living, this new, and this world could be online. Maybe you still live where your parents are, that second world. And then if you think about them as a Venn diagram, that space in the middle, which of those identities would you pull to say, this is who I am, this is what makes me who I am, what feels home to me? So go back to the process of, I don't need to fully let go of my first space or my first home in order to, you know, be myself. And I don't need to fully belong to this new one to fully feel like, you know, I'm home. I can create that own home for myself. And actually, there's a poem that I wrote here, and it's easier for me to look it up on my Kindle, that will immensely help you with this. Give me one moment. Okay. I carry the burden of all my past identities as I revolt to be myself. I don't resemble the identities I left behind, nor do I resemble the ones I'm mistaken to have. To the world I left, I am no longer who I used to be. I am no longer welcome. And to the world I entered, I am too different. I am not welcome. So I created my own world where I get to tell myself, welcome home.
Wow.
I hope that helps.
It's amazing, amazing.
Thank you.
Danica, if you want to finish what you were saying, we transition into Q&A, but if you want to finish, you're more than welcome to.
That would help if I remember what I was saying. I'm very flowy with my conversation.
Yeah, that's fair.
But you know, I think we were just I'm sure I was beating it up. So
you were talking about energies. All energy. Of your energies.
Yeah, I was talking about just how, you know, your therapist is and works in energy, and just how I feel like everything is energy. I mean, to me, money's energy even. It's just an exchange of energy. It's an exchange of doing something, getting something. And so for your joy, there's an energy exchange, right? And so it has to kind of go through the pain to come through for the joy. It's like you don't just continue to just like notch up and never have to go through any emotion. Like there's got to be an exchange there. So it's a process that you've got to be willing to step into.
Yes.
Our second question comes from Melanie, and she asks, this is actually for Danica. Danica, your career in racing was a monumental step for women. Where did you find the strength to keep going despite the misogyny and many other hurdles? What's your advice for women and young girls wanting to go into a male-dominated career?
Wow.
It's an interesting question because I've never been a guy, so I don't know what it's like to experience racing, which was what I did for so long, for 27 years. From their eyes, I only know it from mine. And so it's hard to really, really know exactly what the difference was between the way I was treated and the way that guys were treated. But all I can say is that I chose to look at the positives about being a girl in that world, and there were tons of them. I didn't focus on the fact that maybe someone didn't try as hard for me. Maybe someone was judging me. Maybe someone didn't believe in my talent. Maybe someone was trying to say negative things to bring me down. Someone was booing. Like, I looked at it like, okay, you're booing. Well, I'm just glad you're putting any energy towards it. You know who I am. Thanks. Like if someone, but then there was the other positives of like, I was so fortunate in sponsorship because of being different and because I was able to offer something unique to the sponsor through this unique platform, being different within the platform. So honestly, I just looked at the positives, and again, it's that exchange, right? So I have all these really great, cool, interesting attributes about myself for this job. Of course, there's going to be some negatives. It's just the way it works. Like, and I think that the quicker that you can step into your uniqueness and what is different about you, which is probably something that we've all tried to push down from childhood, is kind of whatever's the most different about us. We're like, not that. Let's just like fit in. As soon as you can finally figure out what that is, and it's something that, you could use to make a job out of it or bring you joy, the sooner you step into that, the better off you're going to be.
Awesome. Thank you. Christina asks, do you have any suggestions for releasing friendships and repeated thoughts of friends that come up?
Releasing. So I talk about releasing in the forgiveness room because I talk about forgiveness as letting go. And when you think of all the weights that you've been carrying, whether they are dead-end relationships or relationships, not necessarily romantic ones, but any kind of relationship in your life that instead of helping you grow, it just weighs you down and it gives you more, more space to actually just like fight for your worth or fight for, convincing someone of how they should treat you or how they shouldn't treat you. You have to come at it again with the awareness and the acceptance. So you become aware of what's actually going on instead of seeing the story as you want to see it. So say, for example, you have a friend in your life who never congratulates you on anything that you do. And if there's a success in your life, they don't, they're not there for you. Maybe they're only there for you when you're like really, really, really down, because maybe on some level they enjoy seeing you that way. Whatever the pattern it is that exists, just tell yourself all of the emotions that you've been carrying, that you've attached to that pattern, which could be, I'm never going to have healthy relationships or friendships, or I deserve this or I don't deserve this. Just understand that those stories are not real. Have that acceptance that this person is making the choice to drag me back and weigh me down. And I'm not going to take that as a reflection of what I deserve, because what keeps us holding on is wanting to change that ending, because we think If I can convince this one person of my worth and my value, then I can change all the other endings in my life that told me that you're not worthy and you don't deserve X, Y, and Z. So accept the story as it is. And then once you're able to do that, I actually have a cord cutting activity in Welcome Home where the elements, the two blades of the scissors, are made of your own self-acceptance and self-awareness, and you take it to that cord that you've been holding on for so long, and you bring those scissors and you say, I accept you and I release you, and you just cut it. And you say, this is going to be painful, and my life after this is going to take a period of loneliness and adaptation to this person no longer being in my life. But I understand that having them away makes my life much more easier to move forward, like in my own authenticity. So I hope that helps. I know that was a general answer, but it helps with any kind of close relationship.
Okay, perfect. So this one is from Jason actually, and I think it ties in with your previous answer, but he goes more specifically and he says, family has always been an immensely important factor to me. How do you build a home when your biological family is toxic?
So family is probably the hardest to let go of. And I know I talked about this earlier where I said, you have to separate their acceptance of you from your acceptance of yourself. If they are standing in the way of you accepting yourself and living in a way, living in that acceptance, then you have to make that choice to build a boundary with them. And the reason I keep saying build a boundary is boundaries aren't just, you don't just say, oh, this is a boundary I'm setting. No, you build it over time, because that process of emotionally detaching yourself from needing them to be okay with you, for you to feel okay with yourself, that takes time. And it takes a series of moments where you reflect, like, what's happening right now? Are they actually seeing me and hearing me, or are they seeing me and hearing me through their eyes, through their parents' eyes, through the narrative that they believe the people around them will say about them based on what their son is like or what their daughter is like? Or so it takes a series of moments of clarity where you understand that where they're coming from has absolutely no bearing on your level of acceptance or the permission that you have to be yourself and to live in that authentic truth. And you have to accept that it's going to be painful to let go of family relationships. It will be painful. So don't try to say, unless I get to a point where I completely resent them and hate them, and that's when I'll be able to let them go. Don't take that route, because resentment is still holding on. You need to just accept them as they are. I actually had a conversation with a very close friend of mine recently where I was saying, I really need to give this person an ultimatum on, like, what am I in your life? And my friend said to me, why do you have to do that? Like, why are you in such a rush to either keep something or break it? Like, why don't you just live your life the way that you want to live it? And naturally, with time, you'll be able to understand that that person, that person's choice or opinion that's not what you should be basing how you feel on, like whether they choose to stay in your life or not. Like, let things naturally evolve as you evolve into yourself. And that hit me so hard. So I hope that helps. Like, don't be in such a rush to say, I hate you and I'm going to let you go and that's it. Like, you're standing in my way of being myself. No, become yourself and things will naturally evolve on their own.
I think that's so beautiful. And I'm thinking about boundaries too. So boundaries are one of these things that for those who are on the codependent side or the people pleasing side are hard. And what I learned about them is that they're not for someone else. They're for me. They're my boundaries. They're not for someone else to go like, don't do that to me. It's like, no, my boundary, my rule is I don't stay when this happens. My boundary is I don't participate in this dynamic in a friendship if this is what it looks like.
Yes.
Your boundaries, they're not for someone else, because the thing is that when they're for someone else, we tend to give them permission a lot. We like, well, it's
Yeah.
not that big of a deal. Okay. And so boundaries are really important. And what I've also learned is that, you know, you can love someone and, right? It's not a but. It's not like, you know, your family or your friends when something happens and then there's just like a grip, a grasping, like you said, because that's still holding on. It's like you can all of a sudden just to start to see them from the observer perspective, where you actually see their trauma and their wounds. You don't actually see their projection to you. I get that it can be toxic, but you can just love them and, right? You can just love them and all their crap. And so try and get to that observer perspective where you can understand that there's a little kid inside of them that's screaming, which is why they're toxic.
And if they don't love you and in return for that, that does not mean that you revert back to saying, well, it's okay. Like, I don't need to evolve in that way or grow in that way. I would rather keep the peace. No, because what you're doing is you're keeping that peace for someone else, but you're disrupting your own inner peace. And going back to boundaries, the way I talk about them in Welcome Home is it's about seeing the value that you have within and saying, I have this value and I'm going to protect it. It's like if I have a diamond, I will make sure that it's, you know, in the right place, that I clean it every once in a while, that it's in a place where not everybody could reach it. And it's the same thing with our own internal boundaries. It's not about, I want to manipulate you to change your behavior by setting this boundary. It's like, this boundary is all about me and the value and the worth that I see within. I'm not trying to live in reactive mode. I am trying to live in self-love mode.
Right. There's actually nothing that needs to be done when you're actively fulfilling your own boundaries with integrity. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to say anything, because if they're not following, if it doesn't fit within your boundaries, you just aren't there, or you don't participate in the conversation. Like, there's actually nothing that needs to be done.
It doesn't even phase you.
Yeah.
I think that was the most appropriate way to end tonight's event. Just setting boundaries, self-love. It is very important. But thank you so much, Najwa, Danica. Thank you for being here. This was an amazing event, very inspirational and very, very necessary, especially given everything that's happened this last year. Like, people need to focus on themselves and get ready to face the world, because we've all been through a lot. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Najwa, congratulations on the book. So beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Your words are almost, I was thinking, you know, your words are almost like journal prompts in a way. Like, they kind of trigger you into a space. So healing. Thank you. And thank you for having me on.
Much.
I'm so sorry to everybody for the connection drop.
No worries. Everything.
Don't apologize.
We made it through the end. That's all that
matters. This was 2020 and like.
Exactly. It's really normal for everyone. To our audience members, if you would like to make a purchase of Najwa Zebian's new book, Welcome Home, you could click on the link, the green link at the bottom of the screen. And with that, thank you both once again. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.